Tonight on Sleepy Historian, you are going to spend a quiet winter evening inside a Viking home. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in wherever you happen to be listening. Perhaps the lights are dim, or perhaps the room is already dark. Maybe the outside world is quiet, maybe it is not. Either way, there is no hurry here. This is a slow story, a story meant to move gently through time, the way long winters once did. And if you happen to drift off somewhere along the way, that is perfectly fine. You can always return another night and continue the journey from wherever sleep found you. But before we step inside the Viking world, I would like to ask for one small favor. If you enjoy quiet history like this, calm stories meant for slow listening, you might consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. It helps Sleepy Historian continue creating these long, peaceful journeys into the past. Now, let us begin with something that might surprise you. When most people imagine the Viking world, they picture brutal cold, snow sweeping across frozen landscapes, bitter winds rushing down from the Arctic, long nights that seem almost endless. And in many ways, those images are true. But the surprising part, the quiet historical truth that historians have slowly come to understand, is this. Viking homes were often warmer than many houses in medieval Europe. In fact, during the deepest part of winter, a well-built Viking longhouse could remain comfortably warm, even while snow piled high across the roof, and the surrounding fields froze solid beneath the northern sky. Not warm in the modern sense of thermostats and heated floors, of course, but warm enough that families could sleep through long nights without frost forming on their blankets, warm enough that livestock breathed slowly nearby, warm enough that the central fire could glow quietly for days, sometimes weeks, without ever truly dying. For people who lived at the edge of the cold northern world, this was not luxury, it was survival. And the story of how Viking homes managed to hold their warmth is not really a story about fire alone. It is a story about architecture, about patience, about shared human warmth, about earth, wood, moss, and snow, all working together in ways that might seem simple, but were quietly ingenious. Tonight you will step slowly into that world. Imagine yourself standing outside a Viking settlement sometime around the 9th century. The evening sky is already darkening, though it is not yet late. In the far north, winter daylight is brief and pale. The sun slips away quickly, leaving behind a soft gray horizon that fades slowly into night. Snow covers the ground. Not the bright, sparkling snow you might imagine from postcards, but a thicker, quieter layer, packed down by weeks of footsteps. Soft in some places, hard and wind-carved in others. The air feels sharp in your lungs. Each breath forms a faint cloud that drifts away in the cold. Somewhere nearby you hear the distant sound of the sea, slow waves touching a frozen shoreline. And ahead of you, in the dim winter light, stands a long, low building. This is the Viking Longhouse. At first glance it does not look impressive. It is not tall, not decorated with shining stone or elaborate carvings. Instead it sits close to the ground. Long, wide, almost blending into the snowy earth around it. The roof is thick with turf and grass, though in winter that grass lies hidden beneath a heavy blanket of snow. The walls are dark timber and packed earth. The whole structure feels solid, heavy, and quietly rooted in the land. But something else catches your attention. From the roof, faint strands of smoke drift slowly upward into the evening air. Not thick smoke, not the choking smoke of a large fire, just a thin, steady ribbon that curls gently toward the sky. It tells you something important. Inside the longhouse the fire is already burning, and that fire has probably been burning for a very long time, perhaps days, perhaps longer. You walk closer. Your boots press into the snow with soft crunching sounds. The cold air brushes against your face and ears. But as you approach the door, you notice something curious. The snow near the walls of the house looks slightly different. Not melted exactly, but softened, as if warmth from inside the building has slowly worked its way outward through the thick walls. This is your first quiet clue. The Viking longhouse is not simply a shelter from the cold. It is a carefully designed system for holding warmth, and over the next little while as we spend time inside, you will begin to understand how every part of the building contributes to that purpose. The shape of the house, the materials in the walls, the heavy turf resting on the roof, the central fire that never quite goes out, even the way people and animals sleep beneath the same roof. All of it works together. But for now, you are still standing outside. The sky has grown darker. The wind has softened slightly, though the cold remains steady and quiet. You step toward the wooden door. It is smaller than you might expect. Viking homes often had low entrances, partly to keep warmth from escaping and partly to block the worst of the wind. You bend slightly as you push the door open. The hinges creak softly. For a moment, cold air from outside slips into the building. And then you step inside. The difference is immediate. Not hot, not blazing with heat, but noticeably warmer. The air feels thicker here, carrying the scent of wood smoke and earth. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dim firelight that flickers gently along the center of the room. Somewhere nearby you hear the slow breathing of animals, the quiet shifting of someone sitting near the fire, the low crackle of burning wood. Outside, the winter night continues to deepen, but inside the longhouse warmth gathers slowly and patiently, held within thick walls and heavy roof beams. This warmth does not come from a single source. It comes from many small things working together. And as we move deeper into this quiet winter evening, you will begin to notice them one by one. The shape of the building, the layers of earth and wood, the endless care given to the fire, the simple but powerful truth that warmth in the Viking world was never taken for granted. It had to be built, protected, maintained, and shared. So settle in beside the fire, listen to the slow crackle of the hearth, and let the long northern night unfold around you. Because the first thing we need to understand about Viking warmth is the shape of the house itself. Now that you have stepped inside the Viking longhouse, your eyes begin to adjust slowly to the dimness. At first, the space feels larger than you expected. From the outside, the building looked low and almost modest, sitting quietly beneath its heavy roof of turf and snow. But inside, the longhouse stretches farther than your first glance suggested. The room extends in a long rectangular shape, fading gradually into shadows at either end. The ceiling slopes downward from a central ridge beam, supported by thick wooden posts that stand like quiet pillars along the interior. And as you stand there for a moment, letting the warmth settle into your skin, you begin to notice something subtle about the building itself. The longhouse is not tall. In fact, by modern standards, it feels surprisingly low. You could almost reach some of the beams overhead if you stretched your arm upward. This is not an accident. In colder climates, tall spaces are difficult to heat. Warm air rises, gathering high above the people who actually need the warmth. The Vikings understood this, even if they never wrote down the science behind it. They built their homes low to the ground, so the warmth from the central fire would remain where people lived, slept, and worked. Heat that stays low is heat that can be felt, and here inside the longhouse, that warmth spreads slowly outward from the central hearth, lingering beneath the sloping roof. If the ceiling were higher, much of that warmth would simply drift upward and disappear into the darkness above. Instead, the longhouse gently traps it. You notice the shape of the walls as well. They are not perfectly straight in the way modern buildings are. Instead, they lean slightly inward as they rise, creating a structure that feels solid and grounded. From the outside, the shape helps the house resist strong winter winds. Wind that rushes across the snowy fields cannot easily catch the walls or lift the roof. The building offers the wind very little to push against. But from the inside, that same shape serves another quiet purpose. It reduces empty space. Less empty space means less air to heat. And less air to heat means that the fire burning in the center of the room can slowly warm the entire structure. You begin to walk carefully along the packed earth floor. The ground beneath your boots feels firm and slightly uneven. Over time, generations of footsteps have worn smooth paths along the length of the house. On either side of the room, wooden benches line the walls. These benches serve many purposes. During the day, people sit on them while working or eating. At night, they become sleeping places layered with wool blankets and animal furs. But their placement also reflects the careful design of the house. The benches sit slightly raised from the ground, lifting sleepers away from the cold floor. At the same time, they remain close enough to the fire that warmth can reach them easily. The entire building seems arranged around the slow spread of heat. And then there is the length of the house itself. A Viking longhouse is called that for a reason. Some could stretch more than 20 or even 30 meters from end to end. At first you might think a longer building would be harder to keep warm, but the Vikings solved this problem with the most important feature in the room, the hearth. Running along the center of the longhouse is a long, open fire pit. Not a fireplace built into the wall like in later European homes, but an elongated hearth stretching along the middle of the floor. Several small fires may burn along its length, or sometimes one continuous bed of glowing coals. The fire is not placed at one end of the building. It runs through the center. This means warmth spreads evenly throughout the space. No one corner of the house becomes too cold. No one family sleeps too far from the fire. The design encourages shared warmth. You move a little closer to the hearth now. The flames rise and fall gently as the wood burns. Occasionally, a small spark lifts upward before disappearing into the dim air near the roof. Above the fire, you notice a faint opening along the roofline. It is not large, just enough to allow smoke to drift slowly upward and out into the night. The smoke does not leave the house all at once. Instead, it lingers slightly in the upper air, forming a thin layer beneath the roof beams. This might seem uncomfortable at first, but over time, people living here grow used to it. Their eyes adjust, their breathing adjusts, and that thin layer of smoke actually helps trap warmth within the house, slowing the escape of heated air. The entire building works quietly as a single system. Low ceilings hold warmth close to the ground. Sloped walls reduce wind pressure and interior airspace. A central hearth spreads heat evenly through the structure. Small roof vents allow smoke to escape slowly, without pulling all the warmth away with it. Even the long shape of the building encourages a shared environment where many people live, sleep, and work together in one protected space. As you stand beside the fire, you begin to realize something else. This house was not designed for privacy. It was designed for survival. In the Viking world, especially during winter, survival often depended on people staying close together, sharing heat, sharing fire, sharing the responsibility of keeping the house warm through long nights. Outside, the snow continues to fall quietly across the settlement. The wind moves slowly across frozen ground and dark water, but inside the longhouse, warmth gathers patiently. It spreads along the length of the room, touching the benches, the wooden posts, the earth-packed floor, and slowly, almost without noticing, your body relaxes into the steady warmth of the space. But the shape of the house alone is not enough to keep winter away. To understand how Viking homes stayed warm through the coldest months, we must look more closely at the walls themselves. Because those walls are thicker and more carefully constructed than they might first appear. Now that you have taken a moment to notice the shape of the longhouse, your attention slowly shifts toward the walls that surround you. At first glance, they appear simple. Timber posts, wooden planks, a surface darkened by smoke and time. But if you move closer, perhaps running your fingers gently along the wood, you begin to understand that these walls are far thicker than they seem. And more importantly, they are layered. Viking builders did not rely on a single material to keep out the cold. Instead, they created walls that worked almost like the layers of winter clothing, each one holding warmth a little longer than the last. From the inside, you see the wooden frame. Heavy vertical posts anchor the structure into the earth, supporting the sloping roof above. Between these posts sit wooden boards, fitted together with careful patience. But the wood you see inside the house is only the beginning. Behind those boards lies something softer, packed earth. When Viking homes were built, the spaces between the timber frame were often filled with layers of soil, clay, and organic material. These layers were pressed tightly together, forming a dense barrier that slowed the movement of cold air. Earth, surprisingly, is a very good insulator, not because it produces heat, but because it holds on to warmth once it has absorbed it. During the long winter months, the warmth from the central hearth slowly spreads outward through the building. Some of that warmth reaches the walls, where it seeps gently into the packed earth layers hidden behind the wooden interior, and once the earth warms, it releases that heat slowly. Very slowly. Even when the fire burns lower in the night, the walls continue to give back a little of the warmth they have stored. You might think of them almost like a quiet memory of heat. The longer the fire burns, the warmer the walls become. And the warmer the walls become, the longer the house can hold its comfort against the cold outside. But the Vikings added yet another layer to this design. Between pieces of timber and earth, builders often packed thick strips of moss. Soft, fibrous, and abundant across the northern landscapes, moss made an excellent natural sealant. When pressed into the small gaps between wooden boards or structural beams, it blocked the tiny channels where cold wind might otherwise slip through. Over time, the moss would dry slightly and compress into a tight barrier. It did not look impressive, but it worked remarkably well. If you listen closely now, standing near the wall, you might notice something interesting. You do not hear the wind. Outside, the winter air may be moving steadily across the fields and frozen shoreline. Snow may be drifting against the sides of the house, but inside the longhouse feels still. The walls absorb those outside sounds almost completely. The thick layers of earth and timber act not only as insulation for warmth, but also as insulation for sound. The house becomes a quiet shell. Inside, only the sounds of the fire and the slow movements of people remain. You might lean slightly against the wall now. It does not feel icy the way a thin wooden wall might. Instead, it feels solid and cool, but not biting. That is another quiet sign of how the building works. The outer layers of the wall face the cold wind directly. The inner layers stay closer to the warmth of the fire. Between those layers, heat moves slowly, trapped by the dense materials. And then there is something else working quietly in the Viking home's favor: snow. To many people, snow seems like the enemy of warmth. But in the Viking world, snow could actually help protect a house from the cold. As winter deepened and storms passed over the settlement, snow gradually collected around the base of the longhouse walls. Drifts formed naturally along the sides of the building. These snowbanks added yet another layer of insulation. Snow contains a surprising amount of trapped air within its tiny crystalline structure. That trapped air slows the movement of heat, much like the insulation in modern buildings. So as snow gathered against the walls, it created a soft outer blanket around the house. The wind could no longer reach the lower timbers directly. Cold air struggled to penetrate the thick barrier of snow and earth and wood. Inside the longhouse, this process often happened so gradually that people hardly noticed it. 1 week the walls were exposed. A few weeks later, the lower portions of the building sat nestled into white drifts. By the deepest part of winter, the house might appear partially buried beneath the snow. But inside, the warmth remained steady. In fact, some longhouses may have grown slightly warmer as winter progressed, simply because the snow outside improved the building's insulation. It is a quiet example of how Viking survival often depended on working with nature rather than fighting it. The cold was powerful, but the landscape also offered tools to soften its effects. Earth, moss, snow, timber, each element contributed something small. And when those small advantages were combined with the warmth of a central fire and the presence of many people living close together, the longhouse became surprisingly resilient against the northern winter. You step back from the wall now and glance again across the room. The fire continues its slow burning in the center of the house. Soft orange light moves gently across the wooden beams. Somewhere in the shadows, someone shifts on a bench, pulling a wool blanket a little closer around their shoulders. Outside, the wind may still be moving across the frozen world, but here inside the longhouse, the walls hold their quiet strength. They do not fight the cold with sudden heat. Instead, they resist it patiently, layer by layer, hour by hour, night after night. And above those walls rests another important part of the Viking home: one that carries its own surprising ability to hold warmth against the winter sky, the roof. Now that you have spent some time noticing the walls of the Longhouse, your eyes slowly travel upward. Above you, the roof stretches along the entire length of the building like a quiet, sheltering spine. Thick wooden beams run from one end of the house to the other. These beams support smaller rafters that slope downward toward the walls, forming the long triangular shape you noticed earlier from outside. At first, it may appear like a simple wooden roof, but just as with the walls, what you see from inside is only the beginning. The true secret of the Viking roof lies in the heavy layers resting above the timber frame. If you could step outside now and climb carefully onto the roof, which people sometimes did during repairs, you would discover something surprising. The roof is alive. Not alive in the sense of movement, of course, but alive with soil and grass. This is what historians call a turf roof, and it was one of the most effective forms of insulation available in the Viking world. First, wooden planks were laid across the rafters to create a solid base. Over those planks, builders placed a layer of birch bark. Birch bark might seem fragile, but it is naturally waterproof. Its layered structure prevents rain and melting snow from soaking into the wood beneath. Above that protective layer came thick sections of turf, blocks of earth and grass cut directly from the ground. These turf blocks were laid across the roof in overlapping rows, much like modern roof shingles. Each piece contained soil, roots, and living grass. When placed together, the turf slowly knit itself into a single thick blanket of earth. Over time, grass continued to grow across the roof during warmer months. In winter, that grass disappeared beneath a quiet covering of snow, but the soil remained, and soil, as you have already begun to understand, holds warmth very well. The turf roof could be surprisingly thick, sometimes as much as 20 or 30 centimeters of dense earth. This created an enormous barrier between the warm air inside the house and the freezing sky above. If the roof had been made of wood alone, much of the heat from the central fire would have escaped upward through the boards, but the turf stopped that escape. Warm air rose gently from the fire. It touched the wooden ceiling. Then it met the thick blanket of soil resting above the rafters. And there it slowed. The earth absorbed the heat, held it, stored it, just like the walls. You glance upward now toward the darker shadows near the ridge beam. There, near the highest part of the roof, you can see a faint ribbon of smoke drifting slowly toward a narrow opening. This opening is sometimes called a smoke vent. Unlike the chimneys used in later European houses, Viking longhouses often allowed smoke to escape through small gaps along the roof line. This design may seem unusual at first. After all, smoke inside a house sounds uncomfortable, but in the Viking world it served several useful purposes. First, the slow movement of smoke helped preserve the wooden structure of the building. Smoke naturally repels insects and slows the decay of timber. Second, it helped dry the interior air, preventing too much moisture from gathering during the long winter months when people and animals shared the same space. And finally, that gentle layer of smoke near the roof acted as an additional buffer of warmth. It slowed the escape of heated air. Think of it as a soft ceiling of warmth hovering above the living space. Below that layer, people slept, worked, and rested in the warmer air closest to the fire. Above it, the smoke drifted slowly outward into the cold night. Meanwhile, outside the house, winter quietly added yet another protective layer to the roof: snow. At first, snow might seem like something that would weigh dangerously on a roof, but turf roofs were incredibly strong. The thick wooden beams beneath them could easily support the extra weight, and the Vikings understood something important. Snow is not just cold, it is also insulating. As winter storms passed across the settlement, snow settled gently across the turf roof. Day by day the layer grew thicker. The white blanket pressed down softly on the living roof beneath it, and that snow added yet another shield against the cold sky. Cold air struggled to reach the turf. Heat from the fire struggled to escape upward. The house became wrapped in layers: wood, birch bark, earth, grass, snow. 5 quiet barriers standing between the warmth of the fire and the frozen sky above. You can almost imagine the house breathing slowly beneath those layers. The fire warms the air warms the wood warms the earth, and the earth releases its warmth back again, little by little. It is not fast heat, not blazing warmth. Instead, it is steady warmth, the kind that lasts through long nights. You sit quietly for a moment near the fire. The light flickers softly along the beams overhead. Somewhere near the far end of the longhouse, someone shifts in their blankets. A wooden board creaks gently as the building settles into the cold night. Outside, the sky is dark now. The wind moves slowly across the frozen ground. But above you the turf roof holds its silent strength. It does not fight the cold. It simply refuses to let warmth go. And as the fire continues to glow along the center of the house, the longhouse becomes something more than a building. It becomes a kind of sheltering organism, a structure that gathers warmth, holds it patiently, and shares it among everyone beneath its roof. But even with thick walls and a living roof, the Viking longhouse still depends on something else, something that must be carefully maintained every day, something that cannot be allowed to fade too quickly, the fire itself. Because in the Viking world, the hearth was never just a source of light. It was the quiet heart of survival. For a moment you sit quietly beside the long line of glowing embers. The fire in the center of the longhouse does not roar loudly like a bonfire outdoors. Instead it breathes slowly. The flames rise and fall in gentle waves, licking softly at the stacked pieces of wood. This long strip of flame running along the middle of the house is called the hearth. In the Viking world, the hearth was more than a convenient place to cook food. It was the steady heart of the entire home. Without it, the thick walls and heavy turf roof would not matter very much. Without the fire, the longhouse would grow cold within hours. But Vikings understood something important about fire in winter. It must never truly die. You notice that the fire is not burning wildly. Instead of a tall pile of logs, the wood is arranged carefully along the length of the hearth. Some pieces burn actively, sending orange light dancing across the beams above. Others have already turned into deep red coals, and those coals are the real treasure. A bed of glowing embers can hold warmth for many hours, even when the visible flames grow small. Throughout the day and night, someone in the household quietly tends the fire. A stick nudges a log, a new piece of wood is added, ashes pushed aside so the coals can breathe. These small actions happen so naturally that they almost disappear into the rhythm of daily life. In winter, letting the fire die completely would be dangerous. If the coals vanished, the house would lose its steady source of heat. Starting a new fire in the damp cold could take time and effort, especially if the wind outside was strong. So instead, the Vikings practiced something very simple. They kept the fire alive. Not always bright, not always blazing, but alive. Late at night, when most people are asleep, the flames shrink down to a quiet glow. The embers rest beneath a thin covering of ash. That ash acts like a blanket, slowing the loss of heat. Hidden beneath it, the coals remain warm. Then, early in the morning, someone wakes before the others. Perhaps it is the woman responsible for preparing the day's food. Perhaps an older family member who rises naturally with the pale northern light. They approach the hearth. With a wooden stick or iron poker, they brush the ash aside. A faint red glow appears beneath the gray surface. The coals are still alive. A few thin twigs are laid gently across them. Someone bends close and blows softly. A tiny flame appears. Within minutes, the fire is awake again. This quiet morning ritual happened in Viking homes for generations. It was simple, reliable, and essential. As you sit beside the hearth now, you begin to notice something interesting about its design. The fire is not contained in a raised stone fireplace like the ones that appear in later European houses. Instead, it rests directly on the ground, inside a long, shallow pit running through the center of the building. Flat stones sometimes line the edges, protecting the wooden floorboards nearby, but the hearth remains open to the room. This design allows the heat to spread slowly throughout the longhouse. Warm air rises from the fire and moves outward in gentle waves. The thick earthen walls absorb that warmth, storing it and releasing it again slowly. You might notice that the benches and sleeping platforms along the walls are slightly raised from the ground. This was not accidental. Warm air naturally rises upward, so the areas where people rested were placed where the heat gathered most comfortably. Closer to the fire, the air feels warm and steady. Further away, the temperature cools slowly, but the thick insulation of the walls keeps the cold from rushing inward. And along the central hearth, many daily tasks quietly unfold. Cooking happens here. A large iron pot may hang above the flames from a wooden or iron support beam. Inside, a slow stew bubbles gently. Perhaps fish, barley, root vegetables, or dried meat saved from autumn. The smell drifts through the house, warm and comforting. Tools are repaired here as well. Leather straps soften near the heat. Wet clothing dries slowly after a day outside in snow. Children sit nearby watching the flames dance across the coals. Stories are told beside this fire. In the long darkness of winter, when the sun may barely rise above the horizon, the hearth becomes the center of social life. The flickering light turns the interior of the longhouse into a quiet theater of moving shadows. Faces glow softly in the amber light. The carved wooden pillars along the hall seem almost alive as the firelight shifts across their surfaces. You can imagine how the sound of the wind outside fades into the background here. Beyond the walls, the winter landscape is cold, silent, and dark. But inside the longhouse, the fire offers a small island of warmth and light. It is easy to understand why the Vikings respected it so deeply. Fire meant survival. Fire meant comfort. Fire meant the difference between a long night and a dangerous one. And yet the hearth did more than simply warm the house. It also helped the longhouse breathe. As the fire burned, warm air slowly rose toward the roof vent you noticed earlier. Smoke drifted upward and escaped through the small openings along the ridge of the roof. This movement created a gentle circulation of air inside the building. Fresh air slipped inward through tiny gaps in the walls and doorways. Smoke and stale air drifted outward above. The house quietly inhaled and exhaled, all of it powered by the steady warmth of the fire. So while the turf roof held heat from escaping too quickly, the hearth ensured that the warmth continued to flow. Together, they created a balanced system. Simple, natural, and surprisingly effective. The Vikings did not have modern insulation. They did not have metal heating stoves. They did not have glass windows or sealed doors, but they had something just as valuable. Generations of experience living with winter. Knowledge passed slowly from parent to child. Lessons learned from cold nights and careful observation. And through that knowledge, they built homes that could hold warmth even while snow gathered quietly outside. The fire crackles softly beside you now. A log shifts. A small shower of sparks rises briefly into the air before fading into the shadows above. Beyond the walls, the wind moves across the frozen landscape, but here, inside the longhouse, the hearth continues its patient work. Steady, quiet, alive, yet even with the warmth of the fire and the protection of the roof, there was another secret to surviving Viking winters. A secret that did not come from wood, or soil, or flame. It came from the living warmth of the people and animals, sharing the same shelter. And that simple arrangement changed everything about how warm a Viking home could truly become. As the fire settles into its steady rhythm, the longhouse grows quieter. The small movements of the day begin to slow. Tools are set aside. The cooking pot has already been lifted away from the strongest part of the flame. What remains now is the gentle glow of the hearth and the quiet shifting of people preparing for the long northern night. You notice something that might seem unusual at first. No one in this house sleeps alone. Along both sides of the longhouse, wooden platforms run the length of the walls. They are not separate rooms. There are no doors or dividing partitions the way modern houses might have. Instead, these platforms form wide shared sleeping spaces. At first glance, it may appear crowded. But this arrangement was not accidental. It was another quiet strategy for surviving the winter. In the Viking world, warmth came not only from fire and walls, but from bodies. Human bodies produce heat constantly, even during sleep. Each person resting beneath a wool blanket releases a small but steady warmth into the surrounding air. One person alone produces only a little heat, but many people together create something different, a shared pocket of warmth. You watch as people begin settling onto the raised wooden benches along the walls. Thick wool blankets are spread across the planks. Some are made from woven sheep's wool, others from animal furs gathered during hunting seasons. These materials are heavy, dense, excellent at trapping heat. One by one, people lie down close beside one another, parents with children, siblings side by side, elder family members wrapped carefully in additional furs. The closeness may seem surprising if you are used to modern houses with private bedrooms and wide mattresses, but here, the arrangement serves a practical purpose. Bodies placed close together reduce the amount of exposed surface area where heat can escape. The warmth from one sleeper drifts slowly toward the next. Blankets overlap slightly. The air between them grows warmer than the rest of the room. Over time, the shared sleeping platform becomes a quiet pocket of warmth along the wall. You might notice something else as well. These sleeping areas are positioned slightly higher than the central floor of the longhouse. That detail matters. Warm air from the hearth rises slowly upward. The raised benches sit just above the coolest air that settles near the floor. It is a small difference. But on a winter night, even small differences matter. The Vikings understood these things through observation rather than written science. They noticed where frost formed first inside buildings. They noticed where warmth lingered longest. Over generations, they adjusted their homes accordingly. As the last few people settle down, someone adds another small log to the hearth. The fire brightens briefly, then it returns to its slow, steady glow. But there is still another source of warmth inside this building. You may have noticed faint sounds coming from the far end of the longhouse earlier. Soft shifting, a low rustling in the dark. Those sounds belong to animals. In many Viking homes, livestock shared part of the building during the coldest months of winter. Goats, sheep, sometimes even cattle. They were usually kept in a section of the longhouse separated by a low wooden barrier. The animals did not wander freely among the sleeping platforms, but they remained close enough that their presence affected the warmth of the house. Like people, animals produce body heat, and large animals produce quite a lot of it. A single cow releases a surprising amount of warmth into the surrounding air. When several animals rest together in a sheltered space, that heat accumulates slowly. The thick walls of the longhouse prevent the warmth from escaping too quickly, so even the livestock contribute quietly to the indoor temperature. This arrangement might sound strange to modern listeners, but for Viking families, animals were valuable companions in survival. They provided milk, wool, meat, and labor during the warmer months. During winter, they also helped warm the house. You might notice that the animals themselves benefit from this arrangement as well. Outside, the wind across the northern landscape can be severe. Snow may pile against fences and barns. Temperatures can fall far below freezing. Inside the longhouse, the animals share the same insulation as the humans. The same walls, the same roof, the same nearby fire. The result is a stable environment where both people and livestock survive the cold season together. And as the night deepens, the sounds inside the building grow softer. The fire shifts gently in the hearth. A sheep rustles faintly behind the wooden barrier. Someone turns slowly beneath a wool blanket. Then stillness returns. Outside the longhouse, winter continues its quiet work. Snow drifts slowly across the settlement. The wind brushes against the thick turf roof. But inside, warmth gathers from many small sources: the fire, the walls, the roof, the shared sleeping platforms, the animals breathing slowly in their corner of the house. None of these sources alone would be enough to defeat the Arctic cold, but together they create something remarkable, a layered system of warmth, simple, patient, reliable. And as the long winter night stretches onward, the people inside the longhouse sleep surrounded by that quiet network of heat. Still, winter survival was not only about keeping warm during the night. Daytime routines mattered just as much, because every morning the house had to wake again. The fire had to be revived, clothing had to be dried, food had to be prepared, and small daily habits, repeated again and again, helped maintain the warmth that protected everyone inside. Those habits were not dramatic. They were quiet, almost invisible, but without them the Viking longhouse would slowly lose the warmth it worked so hard to keep. Morning inside a Viking longhouse begins quietly. There is no sudden rush of movement, no bright sunlight flooding the room. Instead, the day begins slowly, almost reluctantly, as the long northern night loosens its hold on the sky. You are still lying beneath the heavy wool blanket when the first person wakes. Perhaps it is an older member of the household, someone who has grown used to rising early during winter. Perhaps it is the person responsible for preparing the morning meal. Whoever it is moves carefully, trying not to disturb the others resting nearby. The longhouse is dim. The hearth still glows faintly along the center of the room, but during the deepest part of the night the flames have faded down to embers. A soft red light pulses gently beneath a layer of pale ash. The house is cooler now than it was the evening before. Not cold exactly, but cooler. The warmth stored in the walls and roof during the night has slowly drifted away, little by little, while everyone slept. This is why the first task of the morning is always the same. The fire must wake again. You watch as the early riser kneels beside the hearth. With a small wooden stick, they brush the ash aside carefully. Beneath it the red glow of surviving coals appears, small islands of warmth still alive from the night before. The embers are never wasted. A handful of dry twigs is placed across the coals. Then comes a quiet breath of air. A faint orange spark appears. The twigs darken. And then, slowly, a small flame begins to climb upward. Within a few minutes the fire is alive again. This daily ritual might seem simple, but it is one of the most important habits inside the longhouse, because every morning the house must begin warming itself again. Even with thick turf insulation and shared sleeping warmth, the night slowly steals a little heat from the building. The fire replaces it. As the flame grows stronger, the early riser begins another quiet task. Ash is pushed aside along the hearth, making space for new wood. A few larger pieces are placed carefully where the flames can reach them. These are not stacked randomly. Wood burns best when air can move between the pieces. The Vikings knew this through experience. Logs are placed in a loose line along the hearth, so that the fire spreads gradually rather than flaring up all at once. This slow-burning arrangement keeps warmth steady through the morning hours. While the fire strengthens, the door of the longhouse may open briefly. Cold air slips inside for a moment. But it does not remain long. The door closes again quickly, and the thick earthen walls prevent the chill from spreading very far. Outside, someone may be bringing fresh wood for the day's fire. Fuel is a constant concern during the long winter months. Before winter arrived, families spent weeks gathering firewood and stacking it near the house. Every log had to be carried, cut, and stored carefully. Wet wood burns poorly, so the piles were usually covered or stored where snow could not soak them. Inside the longhouse, the first faint light of morning now begins to appear through the doorway and small openings along the roofline. Other members of the household begin to stir. A blanket shifts. Someone stretches slowly. The warmth from the fire is spreading again, and with it comes the start of the daily routine that helps maintain the house's temperature. Wet clothing is one of the first concerns. During winter, people who step outside often return with snow clinging to their boots or cloaks. If that moisture remained trapped inside the fabric, it would chill the body quickly, so clothing is placed near the hearth to dry, not too close to the flames. Wool burns easily if forgotten, but near enough that the rising warmth slowly pulls moisture from the fibers. Boots are turned upside down. Gloves are laid carefully across wooden pegs or beams. Steam rises faintly as the heat does its work. This drying routine repeats every single day throughout winter. It may seem small, but dry clothing means warm clothing, and warm clothing means the difference between comfort and exhaustion when stepping outside again. Another quiet task happens near the walls of the longhouse. The sleeping platforms are checked. Blankets are shaken gently. Animal furs are lifted and allowed to breathe in the warm air. If too much moisture collects in bedding during winter, It can slowly steal warmth from the sleepers. So each day the bedding is aired out near the fire before being arranged again for the coming night. You might notice that even the floor receives attention. The central walkway near the hearth gathers ash and debris over time. Someone sweeps gently with a simple brush made from bundled twigs. This keeps the hearth area clean and ensures that sparks do not settle in stray piles of dry material. All of these routines happen slowly, quietly, without urgency, but together they maintain the delicate balance of warmth inside the longhouse. Fire, dry clothing, clean hearth, prepared bedding, steady fuel. Each part supports the others. Outside, winter continues its patient work. Snow piles higher along the outer walls. Frost spreads across the landscape. The wind travels across frozen ground and icy water. But inside the longhouse, the daily routines act like small guardians of warmth. Every action protects the heat already gathered within the building. Every habit slows the arrival of the cold. And through these repeated tasks, day after day, week after week, the Viking household survives the long winter, not through sudden bursts of effort, but through steady care. By the time the morning meal begins cooking above the fire, the house is warm again. The embers glow brightly. The walls hold the heat. The roof presses gently beneath its blanket of snow, and the longhouse continues its quiet work as a shelter against the northern cold. Yet warmth inside a Viking home was not only about survival. It also shaped how people lived together, where they sat, where they worked, where stories were told. And as the winter day stretches onward, the interior of the longhouse slowly transforms into something more than shelter. It becomes the center of daily life itself. By the time the morning routines settle into their familiar rhythm, the longhouse feels warm again. The fire breathes steadily along the central hearth. The walls have absorbed the returning heat. The faint chill of the early morning has softened into something more comfortable. And as you sit quietly inside the hall, you begin to notice something about the building itself. It is not shaped the way many houses are today. The Viking longhouse is long and narrow, stretching like a wooden ship resting on land. The walls run in two straight lines, sometimes 20 or even 30 meters in length, while the ends of the house curve slightly inward. Above you, the roof slopes steeply down toward the earth on both sides. This shape was not chosen simply for appearance, it was chosen for survival. Because the shape of the building itself helped trap warmth during the long winters. At first, the reason may not be obvious, but if you look carefully at the roof beams above you, you begin to see the quiet logic behind the design. The roof does not form a wide flat ceiling, the way modern houses often do. Instead, the beams rise upward toward a narrow ridge running along the center of the building. This creates a tall triangular space above the hearth. Warm air from the fire naturally rises into that space. You can sometimes see it in the movement of the smoke. The faint gray threads drift upward until they reach the highest part of the roof, where the vents allow some of the smoke to escape. But not all the warmth escapes with it. Much of the rising heat collects within the upper portion of the hall before slowly drifting back downward along the sloping sides of the roof. It is a gentle circulation, warm air rising, cooling slightly near the roof, then settling slowly back toward the walls and benches where people sit and sleep. This quiet movement of air spreads the heat more evenly through the building. The Vikings did not describe it in scientific terms, of course, but they understood it through experience. Over generations they discovered that a long, narrow hall with a steep roof kept warmth more stable than a wide, open structure. A wide house allows heat to drift away too quickly. A narrow house holds it closer. You might also notice the thickness of the walls surrounding the hall. From the outside, a Viking longhouse can appear almost like a low mound rising from the ground. The turf and earth packed along the wooden frame form heavy, dense layers that block the wind. But the walls do more than block wind. They also store heat. During the day, as the hearth burns steadily, the warmth slowly moves into the thick earthen walls. Soil is surprisingly good at holding heat for long periods of time. Once warmed, The walls release that heat very slowly back into the air of the house. So even when the fire burns lower during the night, the walls continue giving back some of the warmth they absorbed earlier. It is a quiet exchange between fire and earth. The house itself becomes a kind of reservoir for heat. This is one of the reasons Viking homes could remain comfortable even during severe winters. The warmth did not come from the fire alone. It came from the entire structure working together. The fire, the roof, the walls, the shared bodies of the people inside. Even the snow that gathered along the outer walls contributed in a strange way. Snow may seem like something that would make a house colder, but snow is mostly made of trapped air between tiny ice crystals, and trapped air is a powerful insulator. When snow piles against the walls of the longhouse, it forms an additional barrier that slows the loss of heat. The house becomes wrapped in a soft white blanket. Inside, the warmth lingers longer. You may notice now that the roof slopes almost all the way down toward the ground. This low profile protects the building from winter winds sweeping across the open landscape. Strong winds carry cold air quickly. If they strike tall vertical walls, they can pull warmth from a building much faster. But the sloping roof allows wind to glide over the house instead of pushing directly against it. The longhouse almost disappears into the landscape during winter. From a distance, it looks less like a tall building, and more like part of the earth itself. This was exactly the intention. Viking builders understood that survival often meant working with the environment rather than resisting it. By keeping the house low, heavy, and sheltered, they reduced the power of the wind. By narrowing the hall, they kept warmth closer to the people inside. By shaping the roof steeply, they allowed heat to circulate gently through the interior space. None of these choices were dramatic. They were quiet improvements made over centuries. Each generation adjusted small details of the design based on what worked best during winter. Where frost formed, where smoke gathered, where warmth lingered longest. And slowly through this patient process, the Viking longhouse became one of the most effective winter homes in the northern world. You might imagine stepping outside now and looking back at the building from a short distance away. Snow covers the roof. The walls appear low and thick. A thin thread of smoke rises into the pale winter sky. Inside that quiet mound of earth and wood, warmth gathers slowly around the fire. People move calmly through their daily routines. Animals rest in the sheltered end of the hall. The wind passes over the roof without much disturbance, and the house continues holding its precious warmth against the cold. But there is another clever detail hidden within this design, a detail that controlled how air moved through the longhouse, because keeping warmth inside a building was only half the challenge. The other half was managing smoke. After all, the hearth burned constantly through the winter months, and without careful control, smoke could fill the house just as easily as warmth. Yet Viking longhouses rarely became unlivable with smoke. They had developed subtle ways to guide it upward and out, and understanding that system reveals yet another quiet piece of winter survival. You are now standing near the hearth once more, letting the fire's warmth reach your hands and face. Smoke rises slowly from the coals. Its movement is gentle, almost imperceptible at first, curling in thin tendrils toward the high roof. You might expect that smoke filling the air would make the longhouse uncomfortable. Yet it does not. This was another quiet secret of the Viking home. Smoke was not simply a byproduct of fire. It was a tool, a subtle system carefully balanced with the structure itself. Look up at the ridge of the roof. Near the highest beams, small gaps were left intentionally. These were smoke vents. Unlike chimneys in later European buildings, they were not enclosed tubes. Instead, the smoke escaped slowly in thin, controlled streams. The roof's steep angle and the long, narrow shape of the hall work together with these vents. Warm air naturally rises from the hearth. It carries smoke with it. As it reaches the ridge, most of the smoke drifts outward, but some remains just below the vent, hovering gently near the roof, creating a thin layer of warm, slightly smoky air that slowly circulates back downward. This layer serves several purposes. First, it insulates the room further. Smoke is made of tiny particles suspended in hot air. That air carries heat upward, and as it lingers near the roof, it radiates back into the living space below. In effect, the smoke becomes a slow-release heater, an invisible blanket above the heads of everyone inside. Second, it preserves the building itself. The slow movement of smoke over wooden beams and turf repels insects and reduces moisture accumulation. It dries the timber gradually, preventing rot during long winters when rain or melting snow might otherwise seep through the turf. Third, the smoke subtly signals to the household where heat is moving. Vikings could tell by observing the gentle curls of smoke whether the hearth was functioning optimally, whether the fire needed attention, or whether ventilation needed adjusting. It was part of the quiet knowledge of survival passed from one generation to the next. You notice how the room feels comfortable despite the chill outside. This is because the Viking system does not rely solely on stopping cold from entering. It works on slow circulation. Warmth rises from the fire. Some heat escapes naturally with smoke. Most of it, however, stays within the house, slowly drifting down the walls and into the platforms where people and animals rest. The smoke vent design encourages a calm rhythm of air movement, no sudden gusts, no violent drafts, just a patient, continuous circulation that maintains a livable interior temperature. Look closer at the roof beams. Some have small notches carved into them. These were practical guides. Poles or ropes could be adjusted to regulate the vent's size, controlling how much smoke left the building and how much lingered. Vikings never needed modern thermostats. They could read their homes through sight, smell, and experience. Now imagine a long winter night. The fire burns slowly. Smoke curls toward the ridge. Outside, wind howls across the frozen landscape, piling snow against the walls. Inside, the warmth circulates quietly, aided by the roof's angle, the wall's insulation, and the gentle layer of smoke above. Even when the flames dim, embers glow beneath ash. The smoke lingers in the upper reaches of the hall. The combined effect of fire, roof shape, walls, and smoke keeps the Longhouse warm for hours, even through the harshest northern nights. You might hear a faint creak as the house settles. Timber contracts in the cold. Snow shifts on the roof, yet inside the air feels calm and steady. This was intentional. Vikings did not want sudden bursts of heat or wind. They wanted a consistent environment. Fluctuations could chill bodies and dampen the stored warmth of walls and soil. Even with animals present in their designated corners, the smoke system works without stifling them. The gentle circulation brings fresh air to them as well, keeping conditions tolerable for both people and livestock. The more you watch the fire, the more you realize. Every detail of the Viking longhouse roof angle, turf thickness, wall density, hearth placement, smoke venting, is part of a quiet orchestration. A longhouse is not just a shelter. It is a carefully engineered ecosystem designed for slow survival, and the smoke, which might seem bothersome to modern eyes, is a central player in that system. It preserves warmth, maintains air quality, protects the building, and tells the household how the fire is performing all at once, without drama, without urgency. This subtle knowledge explains why Viking homes could survive Arctic winters when outsiders' houses often froze. It was not magic. It was patient observation, repeated practice, and careful construction. Every log, every turf block, every notch in a beam was a result of generations learning how heat, smoke, and air move through a space. You feel the quiet effectiveness of the system as the night deepens. The fire burns lower now, embers glowing red beneath the ash. Smoke curls lazily above, circling gently before drifting outward through the vent. The walls continue radiating stored heat. The roof blankets the house in turf and soil, now topped with snow. Warmth from human bodies and animals mingles with the fire's heat. It is slow, steady survival in its purest form, and yet there is still one more secret you might not have considered: how the Vikings used small interior structures, partitions, and platforms to guide airflow and concentrate heat where it was most needed. That subtle ingenuity is what you will notice in the next section. As you move deeper into the longhouse, your eyes begin to notice small, deliberate features. Wooden partitions, low walls, and raised platforms divide the interior space subtly but not to separate people for privacy. Instead, these features guide the warmth, the movement of air, and the comfort of those inside. Along the walls, benches, and sleeping platforms are carefully arranged. The highest sections are placed near the middle of the hall, where the warm air from the hearth naturally drifts. Lower sections closer to the ground are reserved for smaller children or less active areas. Even slight differences in elevation make a noticeable difference in perceived warmth. Partitions, often no more than waist-high wooden barriers, are used near livestock pens or to section off work areas. These are not walls in the modern sense. They do not enclose a space entirely. Rather, they serve to channel air. Warm air rises from the hearth and moves around these partitions. Cold drafts are slowed or redirected. Smoke finds its way toward the vents above, without lingering near sleeping areas. In some longhouses, low screens of woven reeds or wooden lattice are placed near doors or windows. These screens break up sudden gusts of cold air that might enter when someone steps outside. Again, the design is subtle. There is no dramatic barrier, but even a small obstruction changes the airflow enough to protect the warmth inside. Raised platforms for sleeping are another deliberate choice. The Vikings understood that warm air rises. By elevating their sleeping spaces slightly, they ensured that the people resting there were bathed in slowly circulating warmth rather than the cooler air that lingered near the floor. The animals in their pens, closer to the ground, absorbed some of the cold, but their bodies contributed heat to the air that slowly mixed with the human-occupied spaces above. You notice how furniture, tools, and storage arrangements all contribute. Chests and barrels are placed along walls, sometimes in front of windows or gaps in the turf walls. These simple objects serve as insulation. Even a small wooden chest can slow the passage of cold air into the room. Every element in the longhouse, intentional or not, becomes part of the thermal strategy. In the corners of the room you might see cooking areas or drying racks for clothing and furs. Their placement is purposeful. Smoke and warm air circulate around them, allowing moisture to evaporate slowly without chilling the rest of the house. Each morning, as wet boots and clothing are arranged near the hearth, the air carries heat outward gently, touching every raised platform and partition. The walls themselves are not uniform. Timber posts are spaced evenly along the length of the house, supporting beams above. Between these posts, turf and wattle fill the gaps. The posts create small pockets where heat can gather. As warm air rises from the hearth, it moves around these posts, slows slightly, and radiates outward. This adds another layer to the insulation system. Even the placement of people during the day follows a subtle order. Those performing tasks near the hearth absorb warmth and carry it through their movement to others seated further along the benches. Children are often placed near adults, benefiting from shared body heat and proximity to warmth. All these elements, partitions, platforms, furniture, and people interact with the house's shape and hearth placement. The building is not just a shelter, it is a carefully orchestrated environment. Heat is collected, concentrated, and moved slowly, without rushing, without turbulence. The longhouse maintains an almost magical calm, even during the darkest and coldest months of winter. You might wonder how much difference these small design choices made. Imagine a night where the fire has burned low, and the wind rattles against the outer turf walls. A house without partitions or raised platforms would allow the cold air to sink quickly, and warmth would escape more rapidly. The longhouse, with all its subtle adjustments, keeps the temperature more stable for hours. It is not the fire alone that prevents frost from forming inside. It is the combination of fire, insulation, architecture, and human ingenuity. Each decision, every post, bench, platform, and partition contributes quietly but effectively. This orchestration is so subtle that someone outside the house might never notice it. From the snowy landscape, the longhouse is a low mound, smoke rising gently. Inside, warmth gathers patiently, moving in slow currents guided by centuries of observation. And yet, despite the careful engineering, there is room for small unpredictabilities. A shift in wind, a sudden snowfall pressing against the roof, or a wet animal coming in from outside could slightly change how air moves through the hall. The Vikings accepted this. They understood that survival is rarely about perfection. It is about consistency, patience, and attention to detail over long periods. By the time the fire burns low again, late in the evening, the longhouse has achieved a quiet balance. Partitions have channeled the heat, raised platforms have caught the rising warmth, the walls have radiated stored heat, and smoke has moved gently toward the roof vents. People and animals share their warmth. The house breathes slowly, patiently, almost as if alive. And when the night deepens, the household settles into this calm ecosystem. Sleep comes easier. Even those not accustomed to Arctic winters would find themselves gradually acclimating. The warmth is not aggressive or sudden. It is subtle, persistent, and everywhere at once. The longhouse is not only a building, it is a slow living system designed to protect, conserve, and sustain life in the harshest northern environments. By mid-morning, the longhouse hums with a quiet rhythm. Outside, snow stretches across the settlement, the wind moving it in gentle drifts. Inside, warmth gathers around the central hearth. Smoke curls lazily toward the roof vents, and the air carries the faint scent of burning wood and dried herbs. Daily life in the Viking longhouse is deliberate, slow, and practical. Every movement is measured, because wasted energy matters when winter stretches long and fuel is limited. You notice how each task blends seamlessly into the next, creating a rhythm that defines the day. At one end of the hall, someone tends to food preparation. Roots and preserved fish are washed, chopped, and arranged over the fire to cook slowly. Each stir of the pot sends faint ripples of heat outward, supplementing the warmth already circulating through the room. The aroma is muted but persistent, a quiet reminder of sustenance in the cold. Near the center of the hall, someone repairs tools. The rhythm of small hammer strikes on wood and iron is almost meditative. Each tap is careful and precise, ensuring nothing is wasted. Every repaired tool will last through the winter, reducing the need for unnecessary trips outside in the bitter cold. Children, too, have their roles. They may sweep the floor near the hearth, help with firewood, or sort small items for storage. Their movements are slow, almost playful, but always measured. There is a sense of continuity, tasks repeated day after day until they become second nature. The sleeping platforms along the walls are tidied as well. Wool blankets are straightened, furs lifted to allow air circulation, and small adjustments made to ensure maximum comfort for the next night. Even minor tasks like these contribute to the longhouse's ability to hold warmth. You notice the animals quietly observing the household activities. Sheep shift slightly, goats stretch, but they remain calm. Their pens are clean, bedding is dry, and the warmth from the hearth extends even to their corner of the hall. The house is not a chaotic space. It is an ecosystem where humans and animals coexist harmoniously, each supporting the survival of the other. Time in the longhouse is experienced differently than in modern life. There are no clocks or alarms. The day moves slowly, marked by the sun's faint presence through small openings, the gradual fading and rising of light outside, and the subtle changes in fire and smoke inside. Minutes blend into hours as the household continues its quiet routines. Meal preparation, maintenance, clothing care, and social interaction all unfold with a deliberate pace. Conversations are subdued. Laughter is gentle, restrained by the understanding that energy must be preserved. There is no hurry, there is no urgency. Even play and storytelling are measured, unfolding a soft background to the larger task of survival. Outside, snow may pile higher against the walls. The wind may press against the roof. But inside, each small action maintains the balance, every log added to the fire, every blanket adjusted, every hearth ember nurtured, is part of a larger system of endurance. You can see how the routines intertwine. Fire tends to warmth. Warmth dries clothing and bedding. Dry clothing allows the body to conserve heat. Every repaired tool ensures fewer trips outside. Every tidied platform prevents cold drafts from settling. Each small habit compounds over time, creating an environment that feels protective, almost self-sustaining. There is also a quiet hierarchy of tasks. Elders may oversee the household, ensuring that routines are followed and knowledge is passed along. Younger members carry out physical work, sometimes guided, sometimes learning through observation. Skills and survival techniques are transmitted not through formal instruction, but through repeated daily practice. The longhouse itself shapes these behaviors. Its architecture dictates where people gather, where warmth flows, where tasks are easiest to accomplish. The placement of benches, platforms, and partitions naturally guides movement and activity. Even without conscious thought, people adjust their routines to fit the flow of warmth and light. Hours pass slowly, marked only by subtle changes in light, and the ever-present rhythm of fire and smoke. Meals are prepared and eaten. Tools are repaired and set aside. Blankets and furs are adjusted. Footsteps move carefully across wooden planks, avoiding sudden noises or slips. The effect is hypnotic in its steadiness. Time stretches, not with excitement but with purpose. It is a slow, quiet endurance that defines winter life. You begin to notice the sensory details, the soft crackle of embers, the faint rustle of wool blankets, the muted sound of a goat shifting in its pen. Each sound is small but persistent, forming the acoustic texture of survival. Even fatigue is measured. People rest briefly between tasks, feeling the slow accumulation of energy and the quiet relief of warmth. There is a patience embedded in every movement, an understanding that life in the longhouse is not about speed, but about continuity. By the afternoon, the house feels stable. Fire burns steadily. Smoke drifts gently above. People continue their work, often without speaking. The longhouse has become a microcosm of endurance, a place where warmth, labor, and human presence interact seamlessly to sustain life through the harsh northern winter. You realize that the Viking's secret was not extraordinary tools or exotic materials. It was observation, repetition, and patient adaptation. Every structural detail, every routine, every small decision built a system that could quietly endure the cold. Even if you were unfamiliar with winter's severity, you could feel the logic. Every design choice and daily habit reinforces another, forming a self-sustaining rhythm of survival. And in that rhythm, there is a kind of quiet comfort, not luxurious, not easy, but steady, predictable, and protective. As evening begins to approach, shadows deepen, and the house prepares for the night again. The routines of fire tending, clothing drying, and platforms arranging will repeat, following the slow, hypnotic rhythm that defines life in the longhouse. And so, time passes not in dramatic leaps or sudden events, but in the gentle unfolding of daily life, shaped by endurance, care, and the quiet knowledge of generations. Evening descends slowly over the snowy landscape. Outside, the light fades into pale amber and gray, stretching long shadows across drifts of snow. The wind sighs softly against the low walls of the longhouse. Inside, the fire in the central hearth has been maintained steadily all day, its warm glow spreading through the timber and turf, reaching every corner of the hall. You notice that the rhythm of activity begins to change. Tasks shift from preparation to maintenance. The day's labors are drawing to a close, and there is a soft acknowledgement of fatigue among those inside. The quiet weight of winter labor settles on shoulders and limbs. Children who moved slowly but steadily throughout the day now take smaller steps. Their hands relax from constant work with tools or chores. They linger near the fire, watching the flames and the smoke rising toward the roof vents. Even in their stillness, they contribute warmth to the room, their bodies part of the household's slow circulating heat. Adults tend to final chores before the night. Tools are returned to their racks, knives are cleaned and sharpened, and wooden buckets or bowls are dried for use the next day. Each action is deliberate, minimizing wasted energy. Even the smallest act, adjusting a blanket on a platform or straightening a fur skin, has significance. It helps maintain comfort, retains warmth, and supports endurance through the long night. Drying clothing remains an ongoing task. Wet boots or mittens from earlier outdoor work are placed near the fire, hanging carefully to avoid singeing. Wool cloaks and furs, which have absorbed the chill of winter air, are rearranged to dry evenly. Steam rises gently, curling toward the roof vents alongside the smoke from the hearth. The air is warm, soft, and filled with subtle movement. You begin to notice the introspective mood that settles over the household. Conversation slows. Laughter is minimal. There is a quiet attentiveness as people reflect on the day's work, noting what has been accomplished, what remains for tomorrow, and the slow passage of hours that define life in this northern winter. Some sit quietly on benches leaning back against thick furs. Eyes are half closed. Muscles release tension. Bodies respond naturally to the warmth of the fire and the gentle circulation of heat around the longhouse. Fatigue is not abrupt or overwhelming. It accumulates steadily, like the slow layering of snow outside. Animals, too, settle into stillness. Sheep lie down in pens near the walls. Goats curl up on straw bedding. Even their breathing contributes warmth to the room, reinforcing the quiet circulation of heat. The longhouse becomes a shared organism, human and animal bodies, fire, smoke, walls, and partitions all interacting in a slow, sustaining rhythm. Meal preparation for the evening is deliberate. Fish, dried or salted, is reheated or cooked slowly over embers. Root vegetables are arranged to roast. The smell is comforting, but understated, mingling with the warmth of the fire and the faint scent of timber and smoke. Each bite of food is part of the household's endurance strategy. Calories for energy, warmth, and the strength to meet the long night ahead. As darkness deepens outside, attention turns to the hearth. The fire is replenished with wood carefully arranged to maintain steady heat without flaring. Embers are stirred gently, and smoke begins its slow ascent toward the ridge vent above. Watching the fire, you notice the hypnotic quality of the flames, the soft crackle and the glowing embers, which are almost meditative in their persistence. The weight of fatigue is subtle but constant. Limbs feel heavy. Eyelids droop. The mind moves slowly through memories of the day and plans for tomorrow. There is no anxiety here, only a calm acknowledgement of exertion and the gentle promise of rest. Even chores like sweeping are done with measured care. The central pathway is cleared, but not hurriedly. Dust and stray ash are moved slowly toward the edges of the hearth. Every movement is intentional, conserving energy while maintaining comfort and order. Reflection also fills the longhouse. People consider their tasks, the safety of livestock, the availability of firewood, and the conditions outside. These considerations are quiet, internal, almost instinctive. There is no urgency. There is no rush. Just the patient awareness that survival depends on steady, repeated attention to small details. In some corners, individuals sit or kneel, perhaps mending clothes or checking tools for tomorrow. The quiet tap of a needle, the soft scrape of a knife, or the rustle of a woolen cloak adds texture to the ambient sound of the house. Every small action reinforces the sense of order and control over the environment, counterbalancing the harsh, uncontrolled cold outside. As evening deepens, a gentle shift occurs. The hearth's fire becomes the focus of attention. People gather closer to it, seeking its warmth for the last hours before sleep. Conversations are rare, subdued to a whisper, and even children's movements slow further. Fatigue, warmth, and the rhythm of the house guide their behavior. By late night, the longhouse has transformed once again. Platforms are prepared for sleeping. Blankets and furs are arranged carefully. Wet clothing is fully dried near the fire. Smoke drifts lazily toward the roof vent, circulating warmth without creating suffocating air. The longhouse feels like a living, breathing organism, its slow pulse governed by the careful interplay of fire, smoke, human bodies, and animals. Even in this state of calm and fatigue, the household remains vigilant. Survival is a patient, continuous task. The long hours of winter demand quiet endurance, not sudden bursts of action. And in the stillness of the evening you feel that this careful, measured routine, the tending of fire, the drying of clothing, the arrangement of bedding is what truly allows the Vikings to endure Arctic winters without their homes ever freezing. As you settle into your sleeping platform for the night, the sense of time stretches and blends with the surrounding warmth. Fire, smoke, partitions, and walls all work together silently. The weight of fatigue becomes a gentle release, allowing the mind to drift and the body to absorb the steady, sustaining heat of the longhouse. The night in the longhouse is not dramatic. It does not demand attention. It exists quietly, enveloping everyone within in the slow, protective embrace of centuries of accumulated wisdom. And with each breath, each flicker of firelight, and each rising curl of smoke, you begin to understand the subtle genius of Viking domestic life. Night has fully settled over the snowy landscape. Outside, the wind presses against the turf walls, moving drifts of snow in slow, rolling waves. The low sloping roof sheds the accumulated weight of winters silently without disturbing the occupants inside. Inside the longhouse a profound calm has taken hold. The central hearth glows softly, casting long, flickering shadows across the timber beams and walls. Smoke curls lazily toward the ridge vent, moving in gentle, predictable patterns. Every element of the house, from the walls to the partitions, from raised platforms to the animals resting nearby, works quietly together to preserve warmth and stability. The occupants have settled into their platforms and benches. Blankets and furs are arranged with care. The fire's heat, combined with the radiating warmth of walls and the subtle insulation of snow against the exterior, creates a gentle thermal equilibrium. Cold is kept at the edges, managed carefully by the structure itself. In these hours, consciousness drifts slowly. Some may close their eyes, surrendering to fatigue, while others lie awake for a few moments longer, feeling the steady pulse of the fire and the rising smoke. Every breath carries warmth. Every movement, even the smallest adjustment of a furskin, subtly redirects heat. The longhouse becomes a living, breathing system, its slow rhythms guiding the people within toward rest. You can sense the quiet vigilance present, though it is far from tense or frantic. Even in deep night, survival continues through subtle awareness. The sound of snow shifting against the roof, the faint creak of timber contracting in cold, or the soft stir of an animal, is noted without alarm. These observations are part of the silent habitual intelligence that has kept generations alive in Arctic winters. Some members of the household may rise briefly, tending the fire or adjusting embers. Each movement is measured, deliberate, and calm. There is no sudden urgency, no frantic motion. Every act is part of a continuous, patient system of warmth and care. Even a small ember lifted and placed just so can extend the comfort of the longhouse by minutes or hours. You notice how bodies respond to the gentle rhythm of heat and light. Muscles relax, limbs feel heavier, and eyelids droop further. The slow circulation of warm air, combined with the ambient comfort of the house, encourages a gradual surrender to sleep. But it is not an immediate collapse. Consciousness drifts in waves, sometimes awake, sometimes half asleep, guided by the quiet, hypnotic patterns of warmth and safety. The animals curled on straw bedding near the corners contribute their own subtle heat. Their breathing, rhythmic and gentle, joins the soft crackle of embers and the whisper of smoke rising. The longhouse contains all these elements together, forming a slowly pulsing ecosystem of warmth and endurance. Even the arrangement of interior partitions continues to influence the environment. Warm air circulates above raised platforms, gently descending along walls to provide steady heat to the lower areas. Cold drafts from doors or minor gaps in the turf walls are disrupted and slowed. The structure itself guides comfort, a silent collaborator in survival. Outside, darkness is complete, and temperatures drop. But inside, the equilibrium remains. The fire, the smoke, the walls, the partitions, the raised platforms, and the human and animal bodies together create a gentle, persistent warmth. It is not luxury. It is quiet, deliberate comfort, optimized over generations. Time here is fluid. Hours pass without noticeable markers, measured only by the subtle shift of ember glow and the gradual change in air movement. Consciousness moves in parallel, attentive at times, drifting at others. The mind experiences the night almost as a soft extension of the environment, flowing with the patterns of heat, light, and human presence. Every small sound, the soft shuffle of feet, the rustle of blankets, the sigh of an animal adds texture to the ambient soundscape. Nothing is abrupt, everything is gradual. Even the faint hiss of snow shifting outside is integrated into the hypnotic rhythm of the longhouse. As the night deepens further, the house achieves a remarkable stability. The heat from the fire has penetrated walls and benches. Smoke lingers in the upper layers, circulating warmth. The platforms absorb the heat, keeping sleeping occupants comfortable for hours. Even if the fire fades to embers, the structure maintains warmth long enough for a quiet night of rest. Some may awaken briefly, noticing a shift in temperature or a change in the wind. Yet adjustments are calm and precise. There is no panic, there is no urgency. The Longhouse is designed to allow slow adaptation, gradual correction, and subtle vigilance, enabling survival without stress. You can almost imagine observing the Longhouse as an outsider. A mound of timber and turf rests under the stars, a faint plume of smoke marking the steady pulse of life inside. Nothing moves dramatically. Inside, warmth persists, comfort accumulates, and consciousness drifts in and out with the slow cycles of heat and habit. By the final hours of the night, the Longhouse has become a sanctuary of slow endurance. The gentle patterns of fire, smoke, walls, partitions, people, and animals combine into a living system, optimized for survival in Arctic winter. Sleep comes easily to most, drifting in measured waves, punctuated by subtle awakenings and quiet adjustments. In this nocturnal rhythm, you can feel the quiet genius of Viking domestic design, a house that channels warmth, disperses smoke, protects its occupants, and allows the mind and body to surrender to rest without risk. There is no drama, no urgency, no extreme spectacle, just the patient unfolding of hours, each guided by centuries of observation, adaptation, and care. And as you lie on your platform, surrounded by warmth and quiet vigilance, you sense that this is what allowed Viking homes to endure Arctic winters for generations. They did not rely on external conveniences or sudden ingenuity. They relied on slow, deliberate design, patient use of resources, and the subtle orchestration of fire, smoke, and human presence. The Longhouse does not merely shelter, it sustains, it orchestrates. It teaches the quiet power of endurance, the slow movement of time, and the delicate balance required to survive and even thrive in the harshest of northern environments. Sleep, when it finally comes, is soft, steady, and uninterrupted. The warmth flows gently around you. The faint hiss of smoke, the subtle crackle of embers, and the quiet breathing of people and animals create a lullaby woven from centuries of experience. And in that quiet you can understand why Viking homes never froze, even when Arctic winters pressed relentlessly against them. The night outside stretches endlessly, dark and cold, while inside the Longhouse continues its quiet work. You might lie for a moment, letting your attention drift across the space, the faint curl of smoke, the subtle glow of embers, the gentle rise and fall of animals and humans alike. There is a profound difference between this life and the one many experience today. Modern comforts, insulated walls, electric heat, instant light hide the slow rhythms of survival. In contrast, the Viking longhouse is deliberate in every detail, a product of centuries of patient observation. Warmth is earned, preserved, and orchestrated, not taken for granted. You notice how much of survival depends on attention to small things. A single misplaced log, a poorly adjusted fur skin, or a draft allowed to linger could alter the house's equilibrium. Yet these adjustments are subtle, never dramatic. They teach patience, observation, and respect for natural forces. Even today you can sense the value of these lessons. The Vikings understood their environment and responded with steady, continuous care. Every structure, every routine, every particle of smoke rising toward the roof vent was part of a quiet system designed to preserve life and comfort, without hurry, without spectacle. The longhouse becomes a mirror of the human body, systems within systems, each part influencing the other, all working toward endurance. Heat circulates gently, guided by design. Smoke rises lazily, carrying warmth, protecting timber, signaling the hearth's performance. Platforms and partitions move the warmth where it is needed most. People and animals share their energy, blending it with fire and timber into a steady, sustaining whole. You might imagine stepping outside for a moment. The cold presses against your face, stark and unyielding. The wind shifts the snow, piling it against the walls and roof. For anyone not accustomed, the Arctic winter could feel relentless, and yet, inside, warmth persists, not as a sudden blast, but as a patient, persistent presence, carefully orchestrated and quietly maintained. Even in modern homes, this lesson has value. Today, heat is often abundant, but its distribution can be uneven. Fireplaces are decorative, rarely central to life. The Viking longhouse reminds you that survival is not about abundance, but about efficient, deliberate management of resources and environment. It is about understanding natural forces and using small, steady actions to create stability. You notice, too, the subtle human element. The rhythms of life within the house meal preparation, tending the fire, repairing tools, caring for animals are all acts of attentiveness. None are urgent, none are frantic. They are measured, deliberate, repeated day after day, night after night. In their repetition lies security. In their patience lies comfort. Even as centuries separate you from this world, you can feel the calm logic of it. The slow movement of smoke, the careful arrangement of platforms, the quiet circulation of warmth, all are strategies honed over generations. It is not technology that enables the Vikings to survive Arctic winters. It is knowledge, observation, and measured action. As you reflect, you may notice the way your own breathing matches the rhythm of the house. Inhale, exhale. The fire crackles softly. Smoke curls gently above. You begin to sense the hypnotic quality of this environment, a slow, deliberate system that guides attention, movement, and eventually consciousness itself toward rest. Even in the stillness of night, the longhouse is alive. Not in a sudden or dramatic way, but through the quiet interplay of materials, fire, bodies, and careful design. Walls breathe with the warmth they store. Platforms collect and release heat. Smoke signals the hearth's strength. The space itself is a participant in survival, patiently sustaining its inhabitants. Perhaps the most striking lesson is how unobtrusive this system is. Nothing in the longhouse forces its occupants into action. Everything is gentle, almost invisible. The warmth envelops without suffocating. The smoke circulates without irritation. Fatigue is acknowledged, not ignored, guiding rest naturally. The subtle orchestration is what allows people to endure the long Arctic nights without their homes ever freezing. You can feel the contrast with modern expectations of comfort. Today we often measure warmth, light, and security in absolute terms. The Vikings measured it in flow, balance, and endurance. They recognized that survival is a continuous process, not a momentary achievement. Every ember, every fur skin, every beam and piece of turf contributed to this ongoing slow-motion system. There is a calm reassurance in this. Modern life can be noisy and frantic, filled with abrupt demands and sudden alarms. The Viking longhouse offers a lesson in slow vigilance. Survival is not about constant motion or high energy. It is about measured observation, gentle adjustment, and the quiet accumulation of small actions that maintain balance over long periods. You notice the house's quiet generosity. Heat is distributed evenly, smoke protects the timber, raised platforms catch warmth, partitions guide airflow, and bodies radiate heat into every corner. There is a sense of being enveloped, supported, and attended to, not by a person or machine, but by a system carefully evolved to endure. Even as you consider leaving this space metaphorically or in imagination, you carry with you an understanding of patience. You feel the way small actions compound over time, the way observation and deliberate care shape outcomes, and the quiet, unhurried persistence that defines endurance in the harshest climates. The longhouse, with its fire, smoke, timber, turf, platforms, and partitions, becomes more than a building. It is a teacher. It shows how life can persist calmly, steadily, and quietly, even under the pressure of Arctic winter. And in that quiet you sense the remarkable skill, wisdom, and foresight of the people who lived within it. You may close your eyes, imagining the firelight flickering across the walls, the faint curl of smoke above, the slow, measured breathing of sleeping people and animals. The rhythms of this environment are hypnotic and calming. They echo through time, offering insight not just into history, but into the enduring principles of care, patience, and survival. In this still, reflective space, there is no sudden resolution, no dramatic conclusion. There is only the gentle release of observation, the calm of endurance, and the slow passage of time. Sleep, when it comes, is soft, uninterrupted, and steady, guided by the careful orchestration of warmth, architecture, and life. And as you drift, you carry with you the quiet understanding that Viking homes, built with patience, knowledge, and deliberate care, never froze, not because of magic or wealth, but because of the subtle, continuous management of warmth, airflow, and human presence. In the soft glow of memory, you can imagine that same system continuing to work, night after night, winter after winter, centuries ago. And in that imagining, there is a calm reassurance that endurance is possible, even in the coldest and darkest circumstances, when care, patience, and quiet observation are applied consistently. The Longhouse fades from sight, but its lesson endures. Heat is slow. Smoke circulates. Platforms and partitions guide warmth. Fatigue is acknowledged. Every element works together. And in that careful orchestration, life persists. Sleep arrives softly, carried on embers, smoke, and the gentle pulse of the Longhouse. And you, as the witness to this quiet genius, can rest alongside it, warmed by the slow, deliberate, patient wisdom of generations.